Well, welcome to PRORAW in the Raw, and today it's our foot fetish episode. Introducing Steve. Steve is a very experienced podiatrist, and he's working out here at PRORAW, training hard, and Steve's going to give us a lot of information about the advantages of podiatry and what it can give to us as weight trainers. Super Steve, good to have you in the house.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Well, tell me, when did you really start up in the world of podiatry?
Started practice in 1993.
93,
Yes.
Last century, huh?
Starting to get the hang of it.
Well, that's a huge experience. You've got a wealth behind you. What sort of podiatry did you start with?
Well, I started in a general practice like most podiatrists do, but I came from a background in phys ed first,
Yep.
so that was my first degree, and I'd worked in strength and conditioning in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Yeah.
And I carried that over into my interest in podiatry.
So you
once
started
I
in the phys
there.
ed initially. What sort of phys ed were you working with then?
Well, I was lecturing at what is now RMIT at Bundoora
Yep.
in strength and conditioning, and I was working at Box Hill TAFE in the fitness instructor courses, the early fitness
All right.
instructor, big fit courses.
Shit, really early days, I thought.
Yeah, it was.
So you would have seen a lot of changes over the industry and over those
Massive
incredible
changes.
years.
Of course, we learn as we go.
Yeah.
And I think back to some of the things that we were teaching and recommending back in the 1980s with regards to strength and conditioning that aren't so relevant today because we learn.
Good. And for yourself, you're still on a good weight training journey. You still got your goals and missions?
Yeah, I enjoy pushing the weights around. It's always good to set goals, even in our advancing years, our middle years. I still have ambitions, yes.
Good. Particularly good ones. Any ones particularly that you got scheduled in or dialed in?
Well, Andrew, I turn 60 next year,
All right.
and that appeals to me. I'll get a seniors card, but if I start to compete in something that's in the perhaps in the powerlifting area,
Yep.
I might establish a few goals for myself.
Good. Now, one of the things about your experience is that it means you're not really too broken up after all these years.
Well, I had some time off in the middle.
Yeah.
In my teens and 20s, went hard at it. From my 30s onwards, when I started practicing podiatry in particular, I didn't have as much time to commit to training. But once I'd had a family and my boys got to an age where they started to express an interest in pushing some weights around, that brought me back to the gym. And fortunately, I was still in one piece.
Yeah.
But I think an educated approach right from the get-go has saved me from a lot of bother that I see with others.
This is great and interesting. What took you towards podiatry as a second degree?
I wanted to. I obviously had an interest in exercise from my phys ed area, but I wanted to work for myself. And I had a friend who was a podiatrist, and I saw the problem-solving approach that he had in his practice, and I thought that I could apply what I understood from my phys ed background into podiatry as well, and I saw that as a nice niche for myself.
And how's it gone for you?
Well, I make a living.
And that does give you an advantage as a podiatrist in a gym and in working with weight trainers. What sort of interesting things do you find with the weight training feet that you don't see, say, with the running feet?
Look, that's a good question. The foot is a structure that has to perform a number of different tasks. Obviously, when we're running on a flat surface, it has to work as an effective lever for propulsion. If we were jumping and landing, it has to work as a shock absorber. If we're running on uneven terrain, it has to work as a mobile adapter. In the gym, with a lot of the lifts, we are absolutely static. So it has to work as a stable foundation. So all these things are things that the foot has to do and has to do effectively. And if it's not right, either because of poor alignment or poor application of skill, then an inappropriate foot alignment or an unstable foot can cause problems for not only the foot but further proximal
Now, within that, do you prescribe exercise for foot problems as well?
I do up to a point,
Yep.
because I recognise my limitations and my level of expertise. I understand how the foot works, both in terms of effective function, and I also understand how a dysfunctional foot can contribute to problems. So I focus on what I can do locally with the foot. I have some knowledge of some of the proximal things to do with the glutes, quads, or the other posterior chain muscles in terms of effective foot function, but I often refer on. I work in my professional life as a podiatrist with physiotherapists, and I'm often interacting with them, referring them.
Naturally, yeah, no doubt at all. It's one of the interesting things working as professionals, that we don't blur, as we say, our lines, and be able to work with other professionals in their areas of expertise makes it so good.
It does.
We get really good at what we do.
Yeah, I stick to my knitting, and I let others show their expertise.
That's good. With weight training feet, what's the biggest thing you tend to find as a problem? Like, I walk in the gym, I see somebody pick up a weight, I go, that looks shit. Just without even thinking about it, I can tell that somebody's got a dysfunctional movement pattern. Do you see those things after all these years?
Of course I do. As a podiatrist, if I see a pretty girl walk past, I look at her feet. And that's the same as what I do in the gym. I'm walking around the gym, I'm looking at people's feet. I do it by habit. And if someone's squatting and their feet are slumping inwards and I see their knees swinging in, that concerns me.
Concerns me too. With weight training footwear, what do you tend to recommend with people? What's the parameters you work with people?
Yeah, don't we see a great variety of approaches to footwear?
Yeah, it's huge.
There are people who will go barefoot.
Yeah.
There are people who love their Chuck Taylors and the like.
Yeah.
And there are others who wear a full-on weightlifting shoe.
Yeah.
And obviously, through people's discovery, they find that certain type of footwear will suit them. And that's probably, I would hope, due to their discovery of what suits them with their strengths and weaknesses. Although it might be that their friend or the strongest guy in the gym wears a shoe of a certain type, so they just copy.
Yeah, that's pretty much the flavour of a lot of things. Yeah, everyone loves the favourite one of the year. You know?
Exactly.
It's interesting too with footwear, even with feet. I often look at foot problems when I'm looking at proximal problems, and there are patients there I've had over the years that I've seen walk in, and I reckon Donald Duck would have more of an arch. I've seen people basically walking off their inner ankle. Now, although they might not have foot pain at that approach, I take the approach of saying, if I go, this person wants to lift weights, a couple of 100 kilos on their back, year after year, and they're looking at long-term life, we always have the evidence saying, look, that there's no relationship between predicting injury from structure. But if I look like that, I'm looking at saving somebody a problem 10 years, 20 years down the track.
Yes, I agree. And whilst we might not have the evidence now, it's something that we're yet to find out about, I'm sure. There are some people who have subtle problems with their foot structure and balance that can be easily overcome with technical application to the way they lift, and we don't have to directly intervene with the feet, because just being conscious of good technique can straighten things up. There are other people who can gain more advantage from improving a muscle weakness that might be in a proximal structure that will impact in how we see their feet function.
Definitely.
But there are some people whose structure of their feet is an absolute catastrophe, and those people need some help. And that's where things that like orthotics come into it, and we can put an orthotic in a shoe to help support the foot in a more favourable alignment, and then all those other applications of skill and muscle conditioning can enhance the overall performance.
Yes, a lot of people don't really recognise the role that feet play in various other problems. I've had clients come and see me from various countries in the world, even from, say, North America or even from Asia, who'll fly in and see me for a back problem. And I'll look at them and see that their feet are collapsing, and I see the weaknesses are everywhere else. And yet everyone's just focusing on the back because the back's where the pain is.
Yes.
Yeah, really, some of these people I see, the problems are starting from the ground up.
Yes.
And it's been sometimes the simplest thing I've ever looked at them going, everyone's looking at your back, but if you look at your feet.
Yes. Well, their pain is in their back, but their problem might be in their feet.
Yeah.
So giving them a simple wheel alignment gets the structure right and enables that that symptomatic area to be properly treated.
Yeah, it's biomechanics and mechanics are obviously just the application of physics to either mechanical structures or biological structures.
Well, it's interesting. If you bought a house and it had a crack in the plaster in the lounge room, you might think, well, we need to put a new sheet of plaster up or fill that crack. But you'd also be suspicious there might be something wrong with the foundations. But we don't often enough think about the human body in the same way.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things I think that research is very poor on, because really it's the basic sciences will tell us that these are things you're seeing.
Research is difficult.
It's easy for people to do shit research.
Well, we could prove that, if we wanted to, that playing basketball makes people tall. We could satisfy the statistical requirements. So, I think it's one of those things that's yet to be fully understood.
Yeah, and that's where your experience with feet on a clinical basis is so much more important than just simple a research paper.
It's a problem-solving thing, and I'm accountable to my patients. They will pay me a fee. They expect an intelligent response. And if I solve their problem, they're happy.
It's a very useful thing. Now, with your own footwear and the own way you approach your own training, any tips for people?
In terms of myself, I prefer a low-heeled, stable shoe. I use an orthotic in my shoe to give me a stable platform to push against. And I find that when I'm squatting, in particular, that helps me keep my knees in alignment and helps me with that performance. If I'm not wearing a stable shoe, I have to focus so much on muscularly controlling that alignment rather than putting it into performance.
Right, so often, we love our cues to give people, but if they're overthinking way too many things, everything is lost.
Exactly.
So if you can take that out by an orthotic assisting with a better alignment position, then they can work better on their cueing.
Yes, but it has to be appropriate. An orthotic that's not appropriate for the task is not going to be helpful.
So it's appropriate for the task orthotic is so much different between a runner and a squatter.
Exactly. Just as footwear for someone who's going to be a marathon runner is different to footwear who's someone going to be squatting.
Yeah, so if someone's seeing a podiatrist, the podiatrist really needs to be able to say to them, what are you doing? What is your sport? What are your pursuits? What's your lifestyle?
That's right, and the prescription has to be fit for purpose.
So it's really useful for people who are seeing a person such as yourself to know that they're seeing someone who understands their sport. They're understanding someone who lifts weights, who understands the mechanics of a closed chain, basically, environment.
Exactly, and you would find this in your profession as well.
Yeah.
Amongst physiotherapists, there are some who are very good at working with runners. There are some very good at working with netballers because they have that experience. It's the same in my realm.
And it's a good passion to have, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Problem solving is great.
Yeah, it is. We do it probably daily within our own workouts.
Exactly.
I think somewhere we're really seen as our best subjects are us, ourselves. So you must experiment with yourself occasionally with your own orthotics that you wear.
Yes, it's been a journey. When I used to do other activities. At the moment, my main exercise focus is here in the gym. So the orthotic that I'm wearing is a low but very neutral, straight orthotic, quite rigid because it's a stable platform. If I was going to take up running, it would have to be more flexible.
Interesting is the ankle mobility often gets blamed for a lot of problems, or immobility. And sometimes I think it's overplayed for a lot of people. I see that they've got problems, but there are definitely those I run into who demonstrate some stiffness in the ankle. Do you have to work with that occasionally?
Of course. Some people just can't dorsiflex their foot enough, and that can be a structural thing. Everyone has a different face, and whilst, we've got an eye on each side and nose in the middle and a mouth that goes this way, there are differences within the feet. We all have the same configuration of bones, but there are subtle differences. And sometimes the ability to move through a certain range of motion for some people is limited.
And you really need to see a foot professional to have that assessed.
Everyone who wants an expert opinion should consult an expert.
The expert in the area.
Everyone has opinions, and they all say, I had a cousin who did this, or my next door neighbour did that. But that's not a sensible way of approaching things.
No, it's a care way. You're seeing somebody who deals in the sport that you're dealing with, who understands the mechanics of what you do, and that they're looking at their area of expertise. So if it's spines or shoulders or it's knees or it's feet or it's necks or technique of lifting with the right coach. So you came from a bit of a strength and conditioning background. Did you do much Olympic lifts and things like that when you were back in
No, it was mainly a bodybuilding approach.
Oh, yeah.
But I've come to embrace a little bit more of the powerlifting side of things recently.
Yeah, it's a interesting sport that's really been growing greatly. Do you get much from the CrossFit world at all?
Not a lot, but I have had some, no doubt.
Yep.
And I think that's an emerging area as well. And I think it's probably an area that we looked with some concern, and even some people did with some disdain, but now we understand it better. I think it will really find its place.
Yeah, it's like anything. People tend towards the sports that their bodies are more suited towards.
Natural selection.
Yep. Yeah, you tend to find, like I do, people with, say, a shallower hip socket will be predisposed towards perhaps a Muay Thai or a standing kicking sport. Those who are perhaps not so good might be into a boxing if they've got the deep hip sockets. So we tend to move towards the things where
We do.
we're more suited. You hope so, don't you? Yeah. Occasionally you see some people who are pig-headed who are certainly not made for the sport that they want, but their passion is so strong that our job then is to help them get there.
Exactly, and if they're getting something out of it, good on them.
Yeah, it's so awesome. Now with yourself, Orthotic Prescription, how's that all work? What do you do in it?
Well, what we do is we will first of all have a discussion with someone, find out what their problem is if they have a problem, and mostly I'm in the problem solving position.
Yes.
And we're looking to optimise their foot function. So if an orthotic is required, it has to be specific to the activity. So if it's an impact oriented thing, it might involve some shock absorption. If it's an alignment issue, it will be different. If it's a stable base, like in squatting, for instance, it'll be different again. So I have to have a look at the patient's needs. I have to have a look at what the foot is doing. I have to work out what movement I want to allow and what movement I want to reduce. And this all goes into the prescription to work out what materials I'm going to use, how hard or soft it is, what angles it's set. It can be quite complex.
Some incredible materials you must be playing with these years that you didn't have in the past.
Well, see, in the past, we used to take plaster moulds of people's feet to get the impression, and we would make models, press heat mould things to it to make the orthotic. Now, it's the foot is digitally scanned, and the orthotics are 3D printed, so we've come a long way.
And you have a different range of materials now, different
We
hardnesses.
do, of course. So people talk often about, is it a hard orthotic or is it a soft orthotic? Well, that's two extreme points. There's everything in between as well. So we can make something that's very spongy, where that's appropriate, or something that's very rigid, where that's appropriate. But I say where that's appropriate.
I remember my father even had metal orthotics.
Yeah, back in the day. Yeah, they made all sorts of things.
Yeah, they were solid as hell.
Look, if it was the right shape, it was probably comfortable. But somehow I doubt it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Well, it's been a great introduction into what podiatry brings to the professions, and it's important for a lot of people who are experiencing issues and problems and their foot alignment's being questioned. So yeah, when you're certainly referred on to see a health professional, the usual rules we're taking are see somebody who deals in the sport that you deal in. So this is Steve, and Steve's appreciated your work today.
It's been a pleasure, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll be training back in PRORAW again tonight and today.
Yes,
we never stop.
Indeed. No, that's right.
Thanks for your help today.